Avery Tarlov stood at the viewing deck of the HMS Hammerfall, watching the distant shimmer of Nearest Station grow larger in the void. The station, a gleaming testament to the peaceful ideals of the Kari Collective, floated serenely above the violet gas giant below, its delicate lattice of spires and observation decks glowing softly in the backdrop of space. This was not where Tarlov expected to be after years of service in the Terran Defense Corps, an engineer by nature, not a diplomat. But here he was, on a mission that could redefine humanity's place in the galaxy. He adjusted his stance, hands clasped behind his back, and let out a slow breath. The Kari were pacifists, a coalition of planets that had developed their society around harmony and energy manipulation. They had little need for violence, and even less understanding of Earth's ways. And yet, Earth's military had been called upon to demonstrate their most lethal technology, kinetic weaponry. The irony wasn't lost on Tarlov. The very thing the Kari abhorred might soon become their salvation. Wheel Dockin 10, came the voice of Lieutenant Greaves over the intercom. Tarlov nodded absently, his mind turning back to the briefing he'd received. The Kari had always been skeptical of humans. Unpredictable, emotionally volatile, and worst of all, still relying on weapons that hurled physical projectiles at unimaginable speeds. Energy weapons were the galactic norm, clean, efficient, and civilized. But in the hands of Earth's military, kinetic weapons had been refined into devastating instruments of war. Railguns capable of breaching planetary shields, projectiles traveling faster than the speed of sound, and super-dense rounds that tore through armor like tissue paper. Tarlov didn't care what they thought of humanity's approach to warfare. He only cared that it worked. The docking clamps locked into place with a faint shudder, and the doors to the station's main hub hissed open. Waiting for Tarlov were two Kari representatives, their slender frames wrapped in robes of soft, flowing fabric that seemed to shimmer as they moved. Their skin, a pale lavender, radiated an inner glow that made them appear otherworldly, serene. But the tension in the air was unmistakable. Engineer Tarlov, one of the Kari, spoke in a voice that was like a whisper carried on the wind. "We are grateful for your arrival. I am Counselor Alaron, and this is Advisor Kethren." Tarlov gave a short nod. "Pleasure's mine." They exchanged pleasantries, but there was an undercurrent of skepticism in the Kari's eyes, as if they couldn't quite believe they had invited such a destructive force to their peaceful world. As they walked through the pristine corridors of the station, Tarlov felt the weight of their scrutiny. The Kari were known for their advanced energy shields, capable of deflecting most forms of attack, and their energy-based weapons, which caused no collateral damage. To them, humanity's reliance on physical projectiles seemed barbaric, a throwback to a less enlightened time. But Tarlov knew better. In combat, what mattered was not elegance, but survival. As they reached the observation deck overlooking the Hammerfall, Kethren finally voiced what had been simmering beneath the surface. "I fail to understand," he said, his tone polite but cold, "why your people continue to rely on kinetic weapons when the galaxy has long since evolved past such primitive tools. Energy weapons are superior in almost every way." Tarlov smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Depends on how you define superior. Energy weapons drain power quickly, and they're only as good as the shields they're up against. Kinetic weapons? They're simple, effective, and when you fire around fast enough, it doesn't matter what kind of shield the enemy has. It's going through." Alaron looked thoughtful but unconvinced. "Perhaps. But there are trade-offs, yes? Precision, for instance. Your weapons must be slower to reload, and surely their impact is limited by physical laws." Tarlov paused at the edge of the observation deck, his gaze locked on the Hammerfall's railgun's sleek, angular machines that hummed with potential destruction. "You're right about one thing. Physics does play a role, but it's not a limitation. It's a law we've mastered." Before either Kari could respond, the station's lights flickered. A deep hum reverberated through the structure, and the automated voice of Nearest Station's central AI cut through the air, emotionless and calm. "Unidentified vessels approaching. Possible hostile intent. All personnel, Prepare for emergency protocols. Tarlo's jaw tightened. He had seen enough battles to recognize the calm before a storm. His instincts flared as he turned to the Kari, whose normally serene expressions had shifted to alarm. "Looks like we'll have to cut the tour short," Tarlo said. "Let's hope you're ready to see what those primitive tools can really do." The sudden hum of warning systems echoed through Nira Station, a sharp contrast to the serene atmosphere of moments before. Tarlo's eyes narrowed as the station's lights flickered, casting strange, shifting shadows on the polished floor. Counselor Aileron's expression, usually calm and composed, betrayed a hint of fear. The Kari had never been a people accustomed to war, and the tension in the air was palpable. Tarlo moved swiftly, stepping closer to the station's control terminal as a holographic display materialized in front of them. The outline of the HMS Hammerfall appeared, hovering beside the station in the void of space. But more ominously, 3 unidentified vessels blinked into existence at the outer edges of the display. They were closing fast. "What's going on?" Kethren asked. His usually soft features were hardened by the situation, an alien unfamiliar with the cold grip of battle. Tarlo's gaze remained locked on the display. He recognized the ship's shape immediately. "Valerans," he said grimly. "We've got company." Kethren's eyes widened. "Valerans? Here." This sector was supposed to be secure. "Well, it isn't," Tarlo shot back, his mind already shifting into military mode. "They're opportunists. They must have spotted the Hammerfall and assumed we're an easy target." He glanced at Aileron and Kethren, both unarmed and unprepared for what was coming. The Valerans didn't negotiate. They didn't offer terms. They attacked, stripped planets of their resources, and left nothing but ruin in their wake. Aileron's voice faltered as he spoke. "Nira Station has no weapons. We are not equipped for a conflict of this nature. You're about to see why Earth doesn't rely on energy shields alone," Tarlo said, grim determination in his tone. "The Hammerfall was built for this." The Valeran ships were closing in fast, their dark, jagged designs like predators stalking their prey. They were well known for their bioweapons and energy-based attacks, which could cripple entire fleets in a matter of minutes. Tarlov knew the Kari ships, while advanced in energy technology, were vulnerable to such assaults. But the Hammerfall was different. "Get back to your command center," Tarlov ordered the Kari. "Lock down the station and prepare for impact. Leave the defense to us." Aileron hesitated, his lavender skin paling. "But—" "No time for debate," Tarlov snapped, turning to the Hammerfall's communication link. "Lieutenant Greaves, status update. How long until the Valerans are within range?" The lieutenant's voice crackled over the comms. "They'll be on top of us in less than 3 minutes, sir. Shields are up. Railguns are primed." Tarlov clenched his jaw. 3 minutes wasn't much time. He pulled up a more detailed view of the Valeran ships. They were already charging their forward weapons, likely preparing to fire the corrosive biopods they were infamous for. Those pods were designed to break down metal and disable ships with terrifying efficiency. The Kari wouldn't stand a chance. "They'll hit us with bioweapons first," Tarlov said, eyes scanning the data. "They'll try to melt through the Hammerfall's hull and disable our systems. Make sure the crew's sealed in and the outer armor's reinforced. We've only got one shot at this." "Aye, sir," came Greaves' reply, cool under pressure. The first Valeran ship fired. Dark, spherical biopods launched from its hull, arcing through space toward the convoy. Tarlov watched as the projectiles closed the distance. In the past, these weapons had rendered entire fleets defenseless, but humanity had learned. The Hammerfall had been designed to withstand such attacks, its outer hull coated with a special polymer that neutralized the corrosive agents upon impact. Still, Tarlo's pulse quickened. "Impact in 5, Greaves announced over the comms. 4, 3... A sickening thud reverberated through the station as the biopod struck the Hammerfall. The impact was enough to make the floor shudder beneath Tarlo's feet, but he knew the ship could handle it. He glanced at the status readout. No damage. The Valerans would be confused, even enraged, that their initial strike had failed. Good. Now it's our turn, Tarlov muttered. The Hammerfall's railguns, already primed, roared to life. Super-dense tungsten rounds were accelerated to unimaginable speeds, each shot fired with the precision of a scalpel. The first shot tore through the shields of the nearest Valerian ship as if they didn't exist. In an instant, the kinetic round penetrated the vessel's hull, shredding its core systems and causing an explosive chain reaction. One down, the remaining two Valerian ships shifted tactics, firing energy beams toward the Hammerfall. The station's windows flared as the beams struck the human ship's hull, but Earth's battleships had been built to endure much worse. Tarlov knew the real danger was that the Valerians outmaneuvered them and got behind the Hammerfall, where the ship's defense grid was weaker. "Greaves, adjust firing trajectory," Tarlov ordered. "Plot railgun paths to intercept their movements before they can flank us." The Hammerfall's AI worked in sync with the crew, plotting the Valerian ship's probable movements. In seconds, another volley of tungsten rounds was unleashed. One of the remaining ships barely managed to jump out of range, but the second wasn't so lucky. A direct hit. The ship imploded in a burst of metal and flame. "Two down," Tarlov murmured. "Let's make it 3. The Valerian ship shimmered as it executed a desperate evasive maneuver, its jagged hull barely visible through the swirling debris of its obliterated fleet mates. But Tarlov knew that no matter how fast they were, the Valerians couldn't outrun the Hammerfall's AI-calculated strikes for long. The ship's sleek railguns rotated smoothly, tracking the enemy ship with relentless precision. "Targets try and go FTL," Lieutenant Greaves reported. "They'll jump any second now." Tarlov's eyes remained fixed on the holographic display. "Not if we can help it." The Valerians were notorious for their speed, using faster-than-light FTL, jumps mid-battle to reposition and flank their enemies. But humanity had learned from their previous encounters. Tarlov quickly calculated the probable vector the Valerians would use to escape, anticipating their jump trajectory. His fingers flew across the control console as he plotted coordinates. "Adjust the railgun's firing trajectory," Tarlov ordered. "We're going to aim where they're going to be, not where they are now." The Valerians, still weaving through space, fired a burst of energy projectiles toward the Hammerfall, trying to buy time. The beams collided with the human ship's armored hull, leaving dark scorch marks but no serious damage. Tarlov's gaze hardened. He wasn't about to let the Valerians slip through their grasp. "Hold your fire," he commanded. "Wait for their jump." Seconds stretched into eternity as the crew of the Hammerfall held their breath. The Valerian ship's engines flared, their distinctive, ghostly glow signaling the imminent FTL jump. The vessel blinked, vanishing in an instant, just as the railguns fired. The tungsten rounds tore through space, silent and deadly, reaching the precise coordinates where the Valerian ship reemerged from its jump. The kinetic rounds struck the ship's core systems with devastating force. For a brief moment, the enemy vessel seemed to freeze, and then, with a blinding explosion, it disintegrated into a burst of fire and shattered metal. A collective exhale filled the Hammerfall's command deck. Greaves' voice came over the comm, a note of admiration in his usually composed tone. "That's 3. Tarlov allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. The Valerians were relentless, but they weren't invincible. "Nice shooting," he muttered, though he knew the credit belonged as much to the ship's AI as it did to the crew. But there was no time to celebrate. Another alert flashed across the console. 2 more Valerian ships had emerged from the darkness, moving into a pincer formation around the Hammerfall. These weren't ordinary scavenger ships. Their larger size and sharper, more angular design marked them as warships. Heavy combat vessels armed with enough firepower to breach planetary defenses. "They're trying to box us in," Greaves said, his voice tightening. "If they hit us from both sides." "They won't," Tarlov interrupted, his mind already racing for a solution. "We'll take the fight to them." He pulled up the ship's internal systems display and quickly scanned the options. The Valerians were powerful, but their ships relied heavily on energy-based shielding, something humanity's kinetic weapons had proven time and again to be their Achilles heel. "Prepare for full burn," Tarlov ordered. We'll swing around and engage both ships at close range. Greaves hesitated. Sir, getting that close puts us at risk of their boarding pods. I know, Tarlov said, his voice firm. But if we stay at a distance, they'll pick us apart with their energy beams. We need to get inside their firing arcs before they can overwhelm our shields. The crew quickly adjusted, powering up the Hammerfall's engines. The massive ship lurched forward, accelerating toward the Valerian warships with a sudden burst of speed that caught the enemy off guard. Tarlov could almost picture the panic on the Valerian command decks as the human warship closed the distance far faster than anticipated. Railguns, prepare for rapid fire, Tarlov barked. Target their propulsion systems. I want them dead in the water. The railguns hummed as they recharged. The Valerian warships, now fully aware of the Hammerfall's intent, opened fire with a barrage of plasma bolts. The beams seared through space, slamming into the human ship's forward shields. The Hammerfall shuddered under the impact, but its armor held. Shields at 60%. Greaves shouted, "Hold the course," Tarlov commanded, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. The Hammerfall powered through the plasma fire, closing the gap between itself and the Valerian ships. At this range, the Valerians' energy weapons were less effective. Tarlov's gamble was paying off. Now, Tarlov shouted. The railguns unleashed their volley, sending a storm of tungsten rounds directly into the nearest Valerian warship. The projectiles ripped through the ship's energy shields as though they weren't there, slamming into its engines and sending the entire vessel spiraling out of control. A second volley finished the job, obliterating the Valerian ship in a massive explosion. The remaining Valerian warship attempted to retreat, its engines flaring in a desperate bid to escape. But Tarlov was already one step ahead. Target the second ship. Disable their engines. The Hammerfall fired once more. The Valerian ship shuddered as its propulsion system was struck, leaving it stranded and vulnerable. Tarlov didn't wait for the final blow. Finish them. A single railgun shot pierced the Valerian ship's hull, and it detonated in a blinding flash. Silence fell over the battlefield as the wreckage of the enemy fleet drifted through space. Tarlov exhaled, his hands finally relaxing on the console. The Valerians had underestimated humanity once again. The debris of the Valerian fleet floated silently through the void, fragments of twisted metal glinting in the distant light of a nearby star. The HMS Hammerfall drifted among the wreckage, its railguns silent now, their barrels still warm from the barrage that had torn the Valerians apart. Inside the command deck, there was no cheering, no celebration, just the quiet hum of systems returning to normal and the slow, steady breath of soldiers who had just survived another battle. Tarlov stood at the center of it all, his eyes fixed on the tactical display, watching the last Valerian ship's life signals flicker and fade into nothing. He didn't relax. His mind was already racing ahead to the next threat. The Valerians had been overconfident. Yes, but they were nothing if not adaptable. They would be back, stronger and more prepared. This was only the beginning of a larger conflict. Status report, he ordered, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over the crew. Lieutenant Greaves, still at his post, ran a quick diagnostic and nodded. Shields are holding at 40%. Minor hull damage. Nothing critical. Engines are fully operational. We're still in the fight. Tarlov nodded, satisfied. The Hammerfall had done its job, and done it well. But that didn't mean they were out of danger. He turned back to the central display, where the wreckage of the Valerian ships drifted lazily through space. Somewhere in the darkness beyond, more of them were waiting. They always were. Send out a distress signal, Tarlov said. Let command know what happened here. They'll need to prepare for the Valerians' next move. Greaves complied, fingers flying over his console. Tarlov didn't need to tell him the Valerians wouldn't take this defeat lightly. The enemy's warships, once feared across multiple sectors, had been torn apart by Earth's primitive kinetic weapons. That was something the galaxy wouldn't soon forget. A door slid open behind him, and Tarlov turned to see Counselor Aileron and Advisor Kethren enter the command deck. Their expressions were a mixture of disbelief and relief. They had witnessed the battle from the safety of the station's control room, but the shock of what they'd seen was still evident in their wide eyes and tense posture. Aileron spoke first, his voice hesitant. "Engineer Tarlov, we didn't expect such." He struggled to find the words. "Such a decisive victory." Tarlov crossed his arms, his face impassive. "You underestimated us." Catherine, ever the diplomat, stepped forward. "We knew your technology was unconventional, but this? The Valerians are one of the most feared fleets in the galaxy, and yet," he gestured toward the display, where the remnants of their enemy floated lifelessly. "And yet, you destroyed them with such efficiency." Tarlov met his gaze evenly. "That's why we stick to what works. Railguns, projectiles, they might seem primitive, but in the right hands, they're more effective than any energy weapon you've ever seen." The Valerians learned that the hard way. Aileron nodded slowly, his earlier skepticism now replaced with a newfound respect. "You've shown us that there's more to warfare than we understood. Perhaps we have much to learn from humanity, after all." Tarlov turned back to the view outside the ship, watching as the Kari ships began to move through the wreckage, scanning for any surviving Valerians or remnants of bioweapon pods. They had been ill-prepared for this fight, but the Hammerfall had ensured their survival. For now, at least. "You're right," Tarlov said after a pause. "You do have a lot to learn, but we're not here to conquer or intimidate. Earth is willing to share what we know, to fight alongside you. We're not interested in being anyone's enemy." His voice grew firmer. "But we won't be anyone's prey either." The Kari delegates exchanged a glance, understanding passing between them. This had been more than a battle. It was a lesson in humanity's resilience, in their refusal to be beaten down by any force, no matter how powerful or advanced. Aileron bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect. "We will bring this message to the rest of the collective. Earth will have our support in the times to come. The Valerians, and others like them, will think twice before targeting your people again." Tarlov allowed himself a brief nod. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was a start. The Kari had seen the value in Earth's way of fighting, in their ability to adapt and survive. But the galaxy was a dangerous place, and the Valerians wouldn't be the last threat humanity would face. Still, they had proven their worth on this day. They had earned their place among the stars. "Lieutenant Greaves," Tarlov called, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Prepare for departure. We're done here." As the Hammerfall began to power up its engines, leaving the broken remnants of the Valerian fleet behind, Tarlov stood in silence, staring out into the vast expanse of space. The battle was over, but the war was only just beginning. And if the Valerians came again, they would find Earth ready and waiting. With a final glance at the stars, Tarlov turned away from the view, his mind already moving toward the next fight. Victory was theirs today. Tomorrow, it would be something else.